If you're going to itemize, there's a lot of different kinds of deductions that you can take. The one that people think about the most often is the charitable deduction. The interesting thing about the charitable deduction is that there's lots of limitations. The thing that we think about most often probably is making cash donations, and that's pretty straightforward. However, there are a few rules. One, always get a receipt, no matter what the amount is. Make sure that you check to make sure that the organization is charitable before you claim the deduction. What happens when you are writing a check and you're getting something back? The IRS rule on this is that you can only deduct the amount of the contribution less the amount of the goods or services that you receive back. So if you write a check to $100 to your local radio station, you get a $15 tote bag, your deduction is actually limited to $85. But what if you have stuff that you want to donate? So there are a few rules. First is the same as before, get a receipt. Always get a receipt. Second is make sure that the organization qualifies. Also, that is again kind of the same rules from before, but the tricky part becomes how do you value the gift? If you're lucky, the organization that you're donating to will value it for you. That makes it really easy because you don't have to do anything. But if you're giving anything of value, valuing it for purposes of the donation, you should keep a few things in mind. If it's less than $250 to any qualifying organization, you can value it yourself. You don't need an appraisal. And the easiest way to do that is think about how you got it, what condition it is, and where you're giving it to. Now, if it's over $250, the rules change a little bit. You're going to start needing appraisals. The more expensive the item, the more likely you're going to need a formal appraisal. You generally don't need a formal appraisal at the $250 mark. Between $250 and $500, you're going to need a statement of the value, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-blown appraisal. Once you're at giving away things like art, collections, anything that's going to cars, anything that's going to be significant, you're going to want that appraised. On the plus side, you can take a deduction for the cost of the appraisal. One of the things that people are most generous about when it comes to donations is actually donating time. It feels like you ought to be able to get something for your time in terms of a charitable deduction, but the IRS actually takes the position that your time is never, ever deductible. And by never, ever, I mean never, ever. And that includes whether or not your time can be valued, because a lot of folks feel like, especially if they're acting in a professional capacity, that since they can value their time easily, that they ought to be able to deduct that. You can, however, deduct the cost of any out-of-pocket expenses that are associated with your services, any of the stuff that you bring along in terms of your own supplies, any expenses that you incur, you can certainly deduct those. You can also deduct reasonable travel, meal-related expenses, basically anything that you spend to further the services or to perform the services, but you can't actually deduct the cost of the services. All of that said, you shouldn't let the idea that you might not get the deduction be a deterrent if you want to help somebody. Don't always think in terms of, am I going to get the charitable deduction? You can still be charitable even if you don't get the deduction, so just keep that in mind.